Welcome to the Astro Psyche. I am so happy that you're here. My name is Shawna McGrath. I'm a depth psychotherapist and an astrologer. And today's episode is something that I want to talk with you about, that I want to share and process. And this is one episode of many where there's something that's been churning around in my mind and my psyche that I feel wants to come out. And so that for the moment is long-term personal transits to the birth chart. And yeah, really excited to have you here and to talk with you about this and to just see what comes up for you as I share what's on my mind here. So um, long-term transits are very interesting and exciting and important to me. And they are a big part of my practice in astrology and um, how I work with astrology in my psychotherapy practice with clients, with myself, with loved ones. I find long-term transits really profound, and I find them very meaningful. And I wanted to share a little bit with you about why that is and how I conceptualize them. So, when I say long term personal transits, what do I mean by that? So, a transit is this thing that happens where the current astrology that's happening up there in the sky, has a meaningful impact on our natal chart. So, your natal chart or your birth chart, natal chart, birth chart, same thing, potato, potato. Uh, the birth chart is this moment in time. The birth chart is created based on your birthday, your birthplace, and your birth time. And it's this snapshot of the moment in the sky from our perspective here on Earth when you were born, when you exited the womb. Someone walked out and looked around and mapped out on a piece of paper where the planetary bodies were. That is your birth chart. That is your birth chart. So that is static. Of course, you continue to live out and embody and express the universe, express the archetypes through your lived experience of your birth chart. So, in some ways, it's not entirely static, but it's something that we can measure and that we can look at and say, okay, this was here at this point in time. And then what we can do also to track one's psycho-spiritual development and life experiences over the lifetime is to look at transits. And so a transit is looking at where things are in the sky in relation to your birth chart. And the where things connect in a certain spatial relationship. So transits are something like, oh, Saturn is conjunct my sun, Uranus is square my moon, things like this. It's a planet, an aspect, and another planet. Now, long term, or let me pause here for a second. So that's personal transits, transit to your personal birth chart. We also have world transits. This is if you look up like this month's astrology forecast in general, that is a world transit. We're looking at the transits of the planets in the sky and how they relate to one another out there. It's world, it's more collective. So personal transits, sky to self, sky to you, become long term when they involve any planet that moves very slowly. So um, the planets have different speeds that they move in the sky all the time. They're always moving, but they have different speeds. And so the slower a planet, the longer it takes to move through the sky from our perspective here on Earth. And that means that the transit to your birth chart is going to be longer because it's there for a longer time. And what that also means is that the experience reflected by that transit is going to be more deep, more enduring, often more profound. And I also find it often can, because it is such a long term situation, we sometimes forget that we're in it because it becomes like the water that we're swimming in because there's not a contrast from day to day, week to week, month to month, even. So, planets that create long term transits are the following: Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And so the way that I've listed these are in the order of speed. So Saturn, of this grouping, is the fastest, Pluto is the slowest. So anytime we have transiting Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, anytime any one of those planets is aspecting a personal planet or point in your chart, we know that there is going to be a personal transit that is a long-term personal transit that often spans at least 1 or more years. It's a multi-year experience. And when I say Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto transit a personal planet or point in your chart, what I mean by a personal planet or point is the faster moving planets in your birth chart. So these would be the moon, the sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Those are planets. And I would also consider if there's a transit to a personal point, which is the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, or IC. Those are also sensitive points in the chart that we would want to pay attention to. And this is really important because those personal planets or points are more personal to you. So they are less collective in that your moon placement, the moon moves very fast. It moves through each sign within a couple of days, really, like 2.5 days. The moon stays in each sign. And so wherever your moon is, that's going to be a more personalized experience. I'm going to pause here, see if there's anything else I want to say about this. So yes, so that is what I mean by a long-term personal planet. If I also want to say, if this is like a lot of, you might be totally like, yeah, Shawna, I got it. I know what you're talking about already. No big deal. You might be like, what are you talking about? And if it doesn't fully make sense to you, that's okay. You're just gonna let this wash over you, and um, we can trust that whatever makes sense consciously in this moment, it is what needs to make sense in this moment. And even if things don't consciously make sense, that you're receiving whatever you need to at this moment. Okay. So, why? I was thinking to myself, why is this important? Why do I want to talk about this now? And I just find long-term transits incredibly relevant in a in any kind of activity where we're doing self-reflective, therapeutic, or where we're tracking our life cycles and what is happening in our life. Um, When I first started studying astrology and when I first started practicing astrology professionally, there, so let's see, let me date that a bit. I first started getting intensely interested in reading birth charts like around 2012-ish. And I started reading charts for other people in a professional context, 2013, I believe. Um, and at that time, there was YouTube, there were podcasts, there were astrology podcasts, but it was nothing like what it is now. It was very minimal. At that time, I remember listening to um, one of the OGs, Nadia Shah, had been doing her astrology podcast on YouTube for many years at that point, even, and a few others that I can't remember, but it was very, very sparse. And now, if you look up astrology on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube, there are so many. And what I've noticed this over time is that there are so many resources for tracking the of the moment transits, tracking the transits that are happening this month, this week, today. There's a lot of resources around tracking the minutia of when things are really exact also. And I've noticed that there's been this movement to tracking the exactness of transits, which I think is really incredible and amazing that astrology is so much more popular. I don't know if I would say it's mainstream, but I would say it's so much more popular now, especially beyond the sun sign conception. So many more people are aware that there is an entire birth chart and that has significance, and so that, and also what I've noticed is that um, with that precision, I find that I'm craving to balance that out more and more, tracking these long-term enduring cycles that happen. And I think this is really important because when we're in a transit that is, let's say, 4 or 5 years long, we're so in it. It's so normal. It's just our day to day that we don't even realize often what is happening. And so I think even more important to have a grasp of the transits that we're experiencing and what those archetypal themes and dynamics are, so that we can realize that we are in the water, so to speak, so that we can realize what is, so that we can be more conscious, more aware, more engaged, more uh, participatory with psyche. Uh, and I think also, this is something I've been thinking about, is I find that tracking these long-term cycles, tracking transits in whatever way that you do, is a very accessible way to reconnect with the cycles of nature. And when I say the cycles of nature, I don't just mean the natural world, yes, the natural world, but also there are cycles of our psyche, both collectively and personally. And so I think personal astrology transits are so amazing because they are reflecting the cycles of our psycho spiritual somatic process and experience over time. So astrology is not specifically predictive, but it is archetypally predictive. And so I think it's quite amazing to be able to see, okay, yes, we're going through a Saturnian phase of development at this point in time, or we're going through a Uranian phase of development. And so those are going to be very different experiences. And of course, sometimes they happen simultaneously, but we can understand, okay, what is it that's happening and what is happening inside and out of us, and what archetypal experience is wanting to emerge through us at any point in time. And so this to me is uh, connecting in with the essence of this cyclical nature of the world, both physically and energetically or psychically. Okay. Do I want to say anything more about this? Mm. Yeah, so also, let me take a sip of tea. Also, the way that, as a depth psychotherapist, the way that I conceptualize the mind is that it is a structure. It is a structure that at the moment we can't really see fully. Our psyche, our mind is this internal structure. And the structure is made up of our conscious mind, our unconscious mind, our our psychosomatic connection. This includes our personal unconscious, our connection into the collective unconscious, and essentially everything that informs our way of being, our way of perceiving, and then how that translates into lived experience and behavior, etc. And because psyche is a structure, in order for our psyche to be transformed, it takes time, because structural transformations, structural changes, the nature of structure is that it is holding things together, and um, there is a certain, what would I say here, cohesion or solidness or frameworkness about the structure of psyche. And so um, it makes sense to me that the changes of our inner world take time to shift, one bit at a time. And of course, sometimes changes can be something that we're working on for a long period of time, and then there's a sudden opening. But also, there is this enduring quality to the structure of psyche. And so, yeah, it takes time for us to have an inner transformative experience where, and this is the difference between depth psychotherapy, depth psychology versus behavioral psychology. Whereas behavioral psychology is concerned with the external or surface or behavioral experience. It's concerned with what we can see and measure on the outside, which of course is very valuable. Things like cognitive behavioral therapy are very helpful for when someone is experiencing like a phobia or something that is impacting their life in a negative way. It really works with the external behavior. If that external behavior does not necessarily have a deep root into the structure of the psyche. Now, that being said, I find that because we are humans and our nature is to change and transform, the structure of our psyche is always changing and transforming. And we can see that through the transits. And I find that the structure of psyche much more intriguing and interesting and exciting than rather than behavioral phenomena. But that's just me. So uh, I digress. Um, Another note here, a part of I think what informs my thinking on this is that I have been very much influenced by the work of psychotherapist astrologer Stephen Arroyo. He's written many books. One of them in particular that might be interesting to you is called Astrology, Karma, and Transformation. And he speaks more in depth than I am able to here today on um, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and the the transformational qualities of these planets in general and also by transit. And he talks about them from this um, psychological lens, also really oriented around transformation. He does include karma in there as well. I think you can read that book and not have to, if karma is not a part of your belief system, you can opt out of taking that info in and still gain a lot from this book. He did not discuss Chiron in the book because, if I remember right, this book came out in the mid 1980s and Chiron had just been discovered about 10 years before that. So Chiron was not quite in the mainstream just yet. Okay. So to connect more into long-term transits and how to conceptualize them. Hmm. I think of long-term transits as these journeys that we take. And a journey is often a long-term endeavor where we go somewhere, we do something, we experience things. And uh, we experience different landscapes or different terrain throughout the journey, depending on where we're going and when it is. And we also participate with that terrain. We interact with it or not, depending on what's happening there. And so I like this way of thinking about transits because transits involve an element of free will, fatedness, and circumstance. So those are sort of like three factors in the way that we experience long-term transits. Um, so free will, of course, is our ability to decide how we want to respond to whatever is happening in our life. And at this moment in time, the way that I see it, I see life and astrology as having this blend of both free will, aka choice, empowerment, and also fatedness. And we could use a different word for fatedness. Fatedness is the things that are just presented to us that we may or may not be able to change in our lives. And this is actually, fatedness is connected into circumstance. So when I say fatedness, what I'm thinking about is that you have the birth chart that you have. You did not choose that unless you have a near-death experience or you realize that your birth info was incorrect. That birth chart is probably not going to change. It is with you. The family that you were born into is with you. I'm going to talk more about circumstance and those factors separately in a moment. But just purely astrologically, you received your birth chart. There is also a sense of fatedness around the transits that you will have for your entire life. And I think this is simultaneously really cool and exciting, but also like, wow, this is laid out um, because you're born this moment in time. So this is static. And then we can also see all of the transits that will follow. So that is mapped out based on the moment that you were born. What I find very side note, what I find very intriguing is that Pluto transits are essentially once in a lifetime transits because Pluto's orbit through the zodiac is about 250 years long. And so we as humans, at least right now, we will never have a Pluto return. Pluto will never go all the way around through the whole entire chart. So you will only have Pluto moving through, depending on when you were born. Pluto will never go past the halfway mark through the chart. So you're only going to have Pluto aspects to some of your personal planets. And the way that your chart is set up is going to determine that. So not everyone will have uh, Pluto opposite the moon. Not everyone will have Pluto opposite the sun. Not everyone will have Pluto conjunct the sun, etc. It's very personalized to you. And so there's a certain amount of fatedness to this. And if we are to understand astrology as not causal, it does not cause experiences, it mirrors experience, it tells us what is happening and what may happen archetypally, symbolically, we can begin to understand um, the arc of archetypal experiences that you may have over your lifetime and different time periods that may happen. All the other thing too is so Pluto conjunct the sun, let's say, is going to be a very different experience for someone if they are 5 years old versus 15 years old versus 50 years old. Those are going to be very different experiences because a person has a different bandwidth, capacity, and things are just so different. And so Pluto conjunct the sun is going to show up differently based on when it happens. Okay, I digress. So there's like this, but then also the free will is we get to decide as best we can with what we have how we respond to what is. Now, our circumstances are also a big part of how we experience long term transits. And circumstances are essentially our intersections of privilege and marginalization. And I think this is really important, and I think it's an often overlooked factor in personal transits, whether we're looking for ourselves or for someone else. This has an impact. So, what I'm tracking around these things is any experience, especially where someone is potentially marginalized and thus more vulnerable, especially during a long term enduring transit, because transformation via long term transit can be. It can be very empowering and exciting, but it can also be destabilizing. Whenever I think of transformation, I think of the caterpillar that goes into a cocoon and then it literally in the cocoon becomes goo. It disintegrates. It disintegrates before it becomes a butterfly. And then when it's still in the cocoon and it's a butterfly, um, it has to effort its way out of the cocoon. And if someone is in a vulnerable or marginalized or um, anything where it's just going to be a little bit harder, there is more support that's needed often through long term transits. And so this can be a variety of different things. Anything from a person's age being either younger or elder and having more or less power and autonomy over oneself, things like disability that are either developmental disability or disability acquired later in life, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, sex, gender identity, um, indigenous heritage, nationality. All of these things are going to either um, provide us with privilege and thus often protection, or marginalization and vulnerability. And as you may know, it is not it's complicated because things intersect and um, impact and influence one another when we're talking about privilege and marginalization. And so these are things that we want to consider. And I'm pausing because this is something that's really important to me to name. And it feels vulnerable for me to name because it is a sensitive topic. It can sometimes be a polarizing topic. And I find myself when I talk about things like this, I think, yeah, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I want to articulate this in a way that where you're hearing my intention. Um, and my hope is that I don't blunder things. So, yeah, just I'm feeling that in this moment. So, I want to say that. Um, and this is important to me because it is my experience that often we see our struggles as personal, as an individual problem or an individual challenge. When sometimes there is systemic factors, when there is collective or systemic oppression or marginalization that is that's really what's happening here. And again, things are complicated, and so I find okay, but side note, I also find that we really, myself included, I'm trying to get better at this. We really love to be like, okay, what's the problem? What's the thing that is causing this problem or unease or disease or, whatever it is? We want to focus on the thing, the one thing. This is very monotheistic when in fact, especially when we're having like really intense challenges that are hard to move through or hard to change or transform, it's often a multiplicity of factors that are feeding in, and and then the symptom, so to speak, is this problem. And so, um, I'm saying that because there can be challenges that are maybe um, products of um, oppression, marginalization, uh, living in a capitalist society um, that values things that tend to cause harm to people in lived experience over time, and also interwoven with that, there is your own personal experiences and your own personal history and your personal temperament, which we can see through the birth chart. So, what I'm saying, what I really want to transmit to you here is that it's complicated. And I think one thing that is really great as we're exploring astrology more from a social justice perspective, and even psychology from a social justice perspective, we're realizing that um, our challenges, our suffering is not just individual, it's also collective. And um, that is important to consider and important to remember, especially when we are going through challenging experiences. Uh, and the other thing I'll say about this is I think just acknowledging where there is something broader than just your individual life that is happening here, acknowledging marginalization or disadvantage or vulnerability reminds us that accommodations and support might be needed here. And of course, sometimes sometimes those support or accommodations are not accessible or not possible at the time. And there is something powerful in just naming that, and that that is a valid need that you have at any point in time. Um, yeah, that's what I have to say about that at the moment. Um, I find also with long-term transits, there can kind of be this ebb and flow where there can be um, experiences that are maybe more an acute experience of the archetypal energies, and then there's a softening, and then maybe an acuteness. And so I want to talk more about that. So I have some notes here to make sure I don't forget anything. In what context am I talking about that? Okay, yeah, I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So, um, but first, I want to ground us in some timing just to know sort of these are the kinds of cycles that we can experience. So, we mentioned very briefly Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Those are the planets that take a long time. Saturn's cycle. So, with astrology, we often track things as far as how long it takes the planet to move through the entire zodiac. This is also the same time that it takes to move through your entire birth chart. So, that is one cycle. So, Saturn takes about 30 years to move through the entire zodiac. So that's why we all have a Saturn return about every 30 years, because every 30 years, the return is just when it comes back to the same place that it was. Now, that's Saturn. Uh, because of this pacing, Saturn transits to a personal planet. So, for example, Saturn conjunct Venus is going to take about 1 to 2 years. That's the time frame of that personal transit. So let's say your Venus is right here at, let's say it's at like 15 degrees of Pisces. Saturn is going to, or it did, Saturn moves into Pisces. It starts to get closer at like 10 degrees of Pisces, is when I would say that transit is active or on. And then it becomes exact 15 degrees of Pisces. It might retrograde and sort of hover there a little bit. And then it's going to move on and finally complete the process at about 20 degrees of Pisces. So that process, while it's there, while it's sort of like hovering around Venus in this example, is about 1 or 2 years. I would say that's still kind of like a long time. Several years, I think often actually, especially with Saturn, Saturn transits can feel like a long time. It can feel like, even if it's like a 2 year transit, it can feel like 4 years. This is just the nature of Saturn. It feels dense. It feel like there's a gravity to it, even if it's not like I don't think so. Side note, lots of side notes here today. Uh, Saturn is one of the planets that also indicates growth, maturation, and commitment. long-term devotion. Saturn has, like all of the planets, many beautiful, life-giving qualities that we value. And even then, I find there still is this gravity to Saturn that feels intense, and it is intense. And so this is Saturn, 1 to 2 years ish. Chiron is more than that. So we're going in order of speed. So Saturn is the fastest of the long-term planets. Chiron has a 50-year cycle through the chart. It takes 50 years for it to go through the entire zodiac. So this means we all have a Chiron return when we're about 50-ish years old. Now Chiron, like Pluto, it has an atypical orbit. So Chiron spends more time in some signs and less time in other signs. So what that means is that a personal transit of Chiron can be anywhere from 1 year to 4 years, depending on what sign it's in. I think this is super fascinating, and it's something that I definitely want to talk more about. I'm going to make at some point a podcast and maybe a course on Chiron based on what I'm learning. Uh, so Chiron spends the most time in the signs Pisces, Aries, and Taurus. It spends about like 7, 8, 9 years in those signs. In contrast, in some of the other signs, it only spends like a year there. So as I'm filming this, we are wrapping up the transit of Chiron through Aries. So all of the Chiron transits that we have been, personal transits that we've been having for the last, I would say, maybe like 20-ish years have been longer than normal. So Chiron is unique in that way. So Chiron transit is going to be like 1 to 4 years. Uranus takes 84 years to go through the chart. So this means this means that Uranus return happens for all of us when we're about 80, early 80s. And this transit, personal transit of Uranus to, let's say, Venus, same planet in your birth chart, but different transiting planet, takes about 3 or 4 years. So there's this 3 or 4 year process of Uranian energy, Uranian experiences, Uranian transformation, which is about departing from the norm. It's about innovation and restructuring itself. I find Uranus is also very connected to flashes of insight and intuition, and just in general, trying radically new things. Uranus has a very opening, um, radicalizing quality. It's also very unstable at the same time. So that period is about 3 to 4 years. Pluto, about 250 years to go through the entire chart. So Pluto transits can be this is the longest one. Pluto transits can be anywhere from 5 years to 10 years. I know that sounds like a long time. And, sometimes we go through, you may have experienced this, where you go through a long-term transformational process. And Pluto is interesting because I think in some ways it can be subtle, yet deep, yet intense at the same time. Pluto is the planet of the unconscious, of depth work, of subterranean things. And so, of all of the planet transits, I think Pluto is the one that reaches the deepest, but often when we're doing this long term deep work, it is, how how do I say this? It can feel more subtle in the moment because it is deeper and longer. And Pluto, like Chiron, has a unique orbit so that it spends more or less time in the signs. I think this is also super interesting. So, depending on the sign that Pluto is in at any one time, it will be a longer transit versus a slower transit. Um, we are in a period of time, as I'm recording this, where Pluto is progressively slowing down as it moves forward in the zodiac. So, this means that our Pluto transits are going to get longer over time. And, you know, I think so. Okay, this is a big part of why I wanted to talk about this is because sometimes take a sip of tea. Sometimes when we talk about this, I hear people say like, "Oh, that's a long time. That's oh my gosh, that's forever." And I think a lot of this can come from where we are discussing something that's challenging, maybe in your life, and we're correlating that to a transit of, let's say, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto. And then it's like, oh, that's a long time. I'm going to have to go through this for that many more years. I don't think that, okay, pause here for a moment. Um, yeah, so when we're going on a journey, it's not constant. We maybe travel for a little bit and then we stop and take a break. We get some snacks. We go to the bathroom. We stop off and see a sight. There's variation. We're still on the journey, but there's an ebb and flow. And so that is how I conceptualize these long-term transits, is that there might be an intense experience that involves some level of sometimes psychological intensity or moving through a particularly challenging experience in your lived experience. And also, the timing of the transit does not mean that that actual experience is forever. And I think actually, when we understand the transit and what is happening, it can help us tweak things and modify and make changes to accommodate for that archetypal experience in our lives. And also, yeah, it's a long time because the human experience is that change takes time, and we are always changing and developing and going through different experiences. Um, the other thing I'll say about this is that the the experience is also we can see the variation via how close the transiting planet is to your personal planet or point. And also, the faster moving transiting planets can act as a catalyst of like opening things. For example, I think a lot of us have just experienced this through, as I'm recording this in May, when is it? May of 2026. We've had several planets in the sky conjunct Chiron. And so anyone that has been having a Chiron transit has like there's been an opening as let's see, what do we have here? The sun in the sky conjuncted Chiron, and then Mercury conjuncted Chiron, and then we're going to have Mars conjunct Chiron. And so this is also potentially reflecting a catalyst moment that, for example, might be sun-like or Mercury-like or Mars-like, etc. And so I share this with you because um, there's this nuance. Nothing is static. It's not like, oh yes, you have this transit and it is this way. It's no, like you're living your life. You're also experiencing other transits. There's also other things moving in the sky that are modifying what's happening here. And I think this is also part of the magicalness of astrology because it is so complex. Now, I maybe should have mentioned this earlier in the time stream here, but I will mention it now. So, a big part of how I work with personal transits is that we use what's called an orb of influence in astrology. So, um, orb, when I think of that, I think of this like little bubble around something. And that's what we're thinking of with transits. So, orb simply means the how close the transiting planet is by degree to the personal planet. Again, if this is like not making, if you're just letting this wash over you, you don't have to fully comprehend what I'm saying in the moment if it's like too much. So for most personal planets, I use a 5-degree orb, and that's based on archetypal astrology. That's what works for me. Um, I find that um, I find that to be it just really, yeah, like it works for me. And I find that when we have the beginning of a planet moving into a 5-degree orb to a personal planet, there is usually a subtle beginning of the experience, and there can often be an omen or something that happens. And then when the transiting planet gets more close, where it's within 2 to 3 degrees, we start to really see and feel the archetypal energy alive. It's like, oh, yes, this is Uranus conjunct Venus. Um, and then when it's exact within degree, it's like really, really alive. And that is where often there can be this sort of like cathartic moment or things breaking open or realizations. It's where things are more potent, I would say, from an archetypal perspective. Uh, that being said, different astrologers use different orbs. I know some folks are really into like 1 to 2 degree orbs, some are into more. It just really depends. And the beautiful thing about astrology is the beautiful and challenging thing is there's so many different techniques, and um, we have such a diversity in the human experience. And so this is the way I think of it, at least at this moment in time, is that we need different techniques for different psyches. And I have found the technique that works for me and that just really speaks to me. And in this way, astrology is a language. And so we want to find the astrological language that works for us, that makes the most sense. Okay, so the other thing I'll say this, and so this also the orbs, it's a bit more technical, but I just felt like sharing with you because yeah, I just kind of felt called to share at this moment in time. So I realize this may not be for everyone. Another thing that I wanted to share is that over time, especially in my therapy practice, I have been compelled to look at not just aspects that are in sign, but also out of sign aspects as well. So let's say Venus is at 0 degrees of Pisces and Uranus is in 28 degrees of Aquarius. Uranus is not quite in Pisces. It's not quite in the same sign as Venus yet, but it is within that 5-degree orb. I would say Uranus conjunct Venus is very active, very alive. It's very operative at that point in time, even though they're not in the same sign. And this is an archetypal astrology way of viewing aspects versus, let's say, a Hellenistic or Jyotish astrology way of looking at aspects, where Hellenistic and Jyotish, they tend to say that an aspect is only active when it's in the same sign. And I, for myself, have found that considering the out of sign aspects is like, oh, yeah, there's really something there, and it's important to factor those in. The way I would think of this is when we have, let's say, a conjunction of Venus and Jupiter, and it's visible in the night sky, two very bright planetary bodies, Venus and Jupiter. We can see them in the sky, and if, let's say, Venus is at 0 degrees Pisces, Jupiter is at, Venus is at 0 degrees Pisces, Jupiter is at 28 degrees Aquarius, and we can see that in the sky. Visually, that is compelling, even though they're not in the same sign, because they're so very close together. And so, this is the way that ancient astrologers first started to study astrology. Is they would look at it in the sky, and then they would make correlations to what was happening in human life compared to what was happening in the sky. And so, this is the way that I think of it, is that in some ways, actually, yeah. So this is the way that I think of it, is I am very compelled by the planetary aspects. And from what we know about astrology, the zodiacal signs came much later. And the zodiac is also just this human innovation that we laid out onto the sky. It's not actual, like we were like, yes, these are the signs, they're all equal and even, etc. We put that on there. And in contrast, the planetary bodies are something that is there, that we can visually see and track, and that is an objective phenomena, so to speak. Okay. So, the other piece that I want to say about this is we could think of these long-term transits just like any journey, as there's an approach, there's a buildup when the planet is approaching exactness. When the transiting planet is exact, there's a peak of experience. It's more intense, it's more um, concentrated. We are often more aware that something is happening, that something different is happening. And then there's a separation where the transiting planet is no longer exact, it's moving away. And I think of this separating as like an integrative process. This sorting through things and, um, yeah, integrating what has happened, which is a really important part of the process. Now, another thing that can happen too, see, there's always so much to say here. Another thing that can happen too is the whole birth chart is this system. The birth chart, each planet is not this one thing that happens in a vacuum. So if you have several planets that in your birth chart that are, let's say, conjunct, or they're in aspect to one another, that can widen the orb and the time period of a transit. So let's say you have Venus in your birth chart at 0 degrees Pisces, but then you have Mercury at 5 degrees Pisces, and then um, you have Mars at like 15 degrees Pisces. Any transit to those planets is going to always one after another aspect Venus and then Mercury and then Mars. And there's going to be this sort of gradient from one to the other. And so you are, let's say it's Uranus, you're experiencing an archetypal Uranian experience of um, wanting to challenge convention and open up new possibilities and release burdens and requirements and release social conditioning. And that is being infused into first your relational matrix, your relationships, what you love, what you find beautiful and enjoyable, which is Venus, and then your Mercury, your communication style and your way of thinking and your belief system, and then Mars, your way of setting boundaries or protecting or advocating, or even your physical um, vitality. So you're getting an infusion of Uranian energy in different ways over an arc of time. So I think this is important too. And this is also a part of why we have long-term transits, because sometimes a transit is not just to one planet, it's to multiples. And there's this blended experience of the astrology that's happening. And we can also do some very deep introspective work as to, oh, like, what's this like for you that in this example, any long-term transformation goes from relational to the mind to the what do I want to call Mars here, to the self-advocacy piece, that this is sort of the way that things go. And isn't that interesting? And what does that mean about you and your life? And this is something that we can look at to understand your psychological process over time and how things work for you. Because this also happens every single month when the moon transits this place. So the moon would conjunct um, Venus, Mercury, and then Mars. And so at short term and long term time periods, this is a part of your process. And again, this is just another way to understand the natural cycles of your psyche that is personal to you. So let's see, what else do I want to say here? I've touched on this. I possibly want to say more about this, that astrology is not specifically predictive. It is archetypally predictive, at least in the way that I practice it. Um, I know there are some people who are incredibly talented at doing specific predictions. Often I find that there's like a bit of psychic phenomena that gets factored in there, but that's a different topic. So the way that I think of transits is that um, we can know. So we don't know what may happen, what is happening, what may happen. What we do know is that the archetypal experience will be here in some way, either in your lived experience or sometimes in your sphere, in your life and the people around you. So, to use another example, if we are having a transit of Saturn to the Sun in any way, whether it's a conjunction, opposition, square, trine, blah blah blah, uh, we know We know that the archetypes of Sun and Saturn together as a pair may arise in your life. And this may involve things such as encountering experiences around responsibility, limitation, mortality, vitality, health, uh, experiences around the father figures, paternal figures. So this is where its archetypal is the literal father figure, if there is one that was or is present for you, or the archetypal paternal figure, so father figures in general, or people that feel um, like they carry that kind of energy for you. Sun Saturn, I think, can also represent authority figures in some way. Sun Saturn can also connect into experiences of vitality, health, wellness, hope, optimism, empowerment, the sense of self, the sense of identity. All of these themes could come up. And I cannot say for you what may happen. What we can do is look at, okay, um, are there other points where Saturn has transited your sun before? And what's that been like for you archetypally? Again, like we're looking at the specific, and then when we look at the past, we want to look at what specifically happened, and then we want to symbolize that. We want to deliteralize that. So, like, let's say the last time that you had a Saturn aspect to your natal sun, you had a really challenging experience with a supervisor. Let's say um, this is very Sun Saturn. Let's say you felt the supervisor was like super critical and micromanagey, and you felt very limited in what you were able to do. You didn't feel effective. And I don't know, maybe it was really challenging on your self confidence. Maybe it was really challenging on your health in some way. Maybe you were working a lot. And so we talk about this. Okay, this is what was happening. And you're like, oh, fuck, Shawna, like, I don't want that to happen again. And so, um, so I really want to emphasize so that experience, that was literally what happened. And we want to explore what are some of the archetypal themes that were happening, and like what was actually happening there. Like things that I would want to know in this hypothetical example are these are just coming to me. So, take it all with a grain of salt, as with anything I say. I would want to know why, when, and how did you take that job? Um, when did you realize that, oof, like this is like a really tough experience with this supervisor? Was it immediate? Did something happen where things changed? Um, if you realized that, oof, like this is like going to be really tough for me, or this is maybe not an ideal situation, uh, was there, how do I want to phrase this? Was there an opportunity for you to make a choice to change or leave or do something different? Or was it like really not possible for whatever reason for you to leave, that you had to stay in this environment? And I would also want to know, yeah, we would want to look at like your context and things around vulnerability and marginalization and um, access to resources that could have helped. Um, I would also want to explore um, other experiences that you may have had over your lifetime around um, people that maybe were critical, harsh, or oppressive in some way. Um, yeah, I would want to kind of explore that a little bit. And I would also want to explore what's happening now, like even before this Saturn Sun transit begins. Like, okay, like what's happening? Like, how are you feeling? Uh, how did you get out of this situation? Is it still happening? Um, I think I think when we have, just to like again really root into this example, I think when we have a challenge around, so a part of this, yeah, actually, okay, many things coming to my mind here. So I think a part of this experience is personal and a part of it is collective. So there is collectively a very real problem for that many folks experience around um, supervisors or people in positions of power or authority being uh, demeaning or oppressive or not supportive. That is a problem, at least from what I have seen in the Western world, in the US, etc. So that is something that anyone may experience. And there are ways that we can tend to that, that we can do the best that we can to address those issues, both personally as well as collectively through advocacy and social justice. Um, and there can also be experiences that one has personally where maybe someone continues to find themselves in situations where there's a rub with authority figures in some way. And so, what can we do here? What I think these are some of the questions is how can we plan and understand what is going on so that we can meet what is in the most informed, empowered, and accessible way possible in the now and going forward. Um, so, other things that I would want to explore here are more of the full spectrum of possibilities of these archetypes. So, Sun Saturn as a combination is, yeah, there is like limitation, there's a gravity, there's a heaviness sometimes, but there can also be uh, themes around deep devotion and commitment as well. I think Saturn to the Sun, sometimes it can feel like there is not a choice. Like sometimes I think that's one of the distortions that can happen during that transit is we feel um, boxed in, we feel powerless, we feel at a loss, things like this. And this is where, especially then, we want to look for where we do have choice, even if it's not an ideal choice, even if it's not the choice that we want. It's like, okay, what is the choice here? And yeah, how can we create with Sun Saturn, how can we create the inner authority figure here? And again, that's going to be really different, really unique, depending on your personal circumstances and um, vulnerability, privilege, marginalization, etc. So that is a very personal process. Um, I want to also to here speak to fear that can come up sometimes when we have a transit, especially with something like Saturn. But I think any of these long-term transits, um, there can be a fear response that gets activated, which is so human, so normal, so this is our psyche wanting to protect us, to like watch out for something bad that might happen so that we can prepare for it so that we're okay. And um I think sometimes fear in itself, just like generalized astrological fear, simply gives us anxiety and causes unnecessary suffering. So, if there is fear that happens to arise for you around any type of astrology, um, I would want to know, okay, like what is the fear specifically? Is there something in particular that you're afraid of? Um, and is there something that is there something literal that needs to be tended to in your life? Because sometimes we get fear where it's like, oh yeah, like maybe it would be beneficial for us to address something or take an action. And that fear is just information for us to do so. But I think sometimes fear can just be this more primal response to wanting to feel safe and wanting to feel okay. And so, if there is fear, how can we tend to fear with our awareness, with like noticing, oh, yeah, like I feel afraid or anxious, or I'm anticipating, I want to make sure everything's okay. Um, and how can we simply notice and then also, if needed, take practical steps to um, do the things that we need to do to take care of ourselves, or to seek the support that we need to take care of ourselves. Um, I think another thing to think about when we're going through a transit, long-term transit, is what is wanting to be experienced through you at this time. Because the archetypes are universal, they're broad, they are non-specific, and through our lived experience, through the human uh, experience, we get to live out the archetypes. And so if you think like, okay, what is Sun Saturn? What does it want? If it were, this being, what would it want to infuse me with? What would the most benevolent, loving, compassionate, supportive Sun Saturn look like? And and then with that, how can we hold space for what may be arising, what wants attention, even if these are feelings like, I don't know, maybe Sun Saturn is wanting you to grieve something that has been um, that's an old loss that maybe just for whatever reason didn't get attention at the time when it happened. And maybe there's some, I'm saying that because um, Saturn is often related to experiences of grief, and Sun is the conscious awareness. And so becoming conscious of grief is a phenomenon that can happen with Sun Saturn. Um, Maybe Sun Saturn is wanting you to um, become more aware of the things that drain your vitality, that drain your life force. Maybe it's wanting to create some healthy limitations and boundaries to support your health and well being. I don't know. Those are just some thoughts. I think, again, anything archetypal, it's limitless, it is unlimited, and there is an unlimited possibility that we can imagine. And so, how can we uh, do both? So, do this imagination and really open up to transits being for you and with you, and also honoring the the real challenges that are here and the real limitations that are here, and um, creating space for your actual lived experience to exist, while also saying, okay, like, so what are some needs here? What are some supports or accommodations, even if that's just accommodations to be with a challenging experience? What is it that you need here? And you get to do all of these things. You get to receive whatever it is that you need in the moment, even if that is simply naming the need. That is powerful. Okay. So I have some reflection questions for you to sit with through this. You may have reflection questions of your own, but yeah, I I want to offer these to you. So as you've been listening here, what thoughts or feelings have come up for you? Secondly, what are you curious to explore more deeply? Could be anything. Doesn't even have to be astrological. Thirdly, uh, what structures of your psyche do you sense are transforming? What structures of your psyche maybe have been transforming over the last year or the last couple of years? You don't even have to know astrology to do this. Just, yeah, like I'm very curious. What's your sense? What do you think is transforming in you over the last couple of years? And finally, what supports do you need at this time to move through your psychospiritual transformation process? What would be helpful to you? And again, I encourage you to connect into the need first and like, okay, like what would be really supportive for you? And I don't want practicalities to limit connecting into that need. I think so often we can say, we can say, oh, well, that's not, I can't have that, or that's not reasonable, so I'm not even going to think about it. I think there's so much value in naming what it is that you need support or accommodations to, yeah, to move through any psychological transformational process. Thank you so much for being here with me. I really enjoy getting to share my thoughts here, and I hope that you get whatever you need out of this time. Um, if you want to find out more about me and my work, you can always find me on my website, theastropsyche.com. And until next time, I'll see you later. Bye.